The waters of Varan Prime glowed with a soft blue light as the sun set below the horizon. The planet was beautiful, covered almost entirely by deep oceans where the Varani people had built their cities beneath the waves. These beings were tall and graceful with smooth skin that shimmered like pearls. They communicated through gentle telepathy and had never known war in their long history. But now their world was burning. The Krell Dominion had arrived 3 weeks ago. Their ships had filled the sky like a swarm of metal insects, and their demands had been simple: surrender or die. The Varani had no weapons, no armies, no way to fight back. They were scientists and artists, philosophers and healers. War was something they had read about in the histories of other species, but never experienced themselves. The Krell showed no mercy. Their ships bombarded the surface, boiling the oceans in places and destroying the floating platforms where the Varani grew their food. Their soldiers landed in the cities, killing anyone who resisted and enslaving the rest. The Varani tried to flee deeper into the oceans, but the Krell followed them even there. Elder Sona, the leader of the Varani Council, floated in the emergency chamber deep beneath the capital city. Around her, the other council members radiated fear and despair through their shared mental connection. They had perhaps 2 days before the Krell broke through their final defenses. "We must send the signal," Sona said, her voice barely a whisper. The others knew what she meant. 3 days ago they had broadcast a message into space, a desperate cry for help sent on every frequency they knew. But the galaxy was vast, and they were just one small civilization. Who would come? Who would care enough to fight the mighty Krell for a species of pacifists they had never met? "No one will answer," one of the younger council members said. "The great powers of the galaxy do not involve themselves in such matters. They will let us die." Sona closed her eyes. She knew he was probably right, but what choice did they have? Far across the galaxy, on a human space station orbiting a red dwarf star, Commander Jake Morris sat in the communications room drinking bad coffee. Outpost Darwin was on the edge of human-controlled space, a lonely facility that monitored signals from deep space. It was boring work, mostly listening to cosmic radiation and the occasional automated beacon from cargo ships. Jake was about to head to bed when his console lit up with an alert. An unusual signal was coming through, strong and clear despite the distance. He sat up and began analyzing it. What he saw made his blood run cold. The message was in a universal format that most spacefaring species used. It was short and desperate. "We are the Varani of Varan Prime. We are under attack, we are dying. Please, anyone who can hear this, help us. We have children, we have no weapons, they are killing us all. Please help." The message included coordinates and repeated over and over. Jake immediately forwarded the signal to Earth and to Terran Defense Coalition headquarters. Within an hour, he received a response telling him to stand by. Within 3 hours, half the Admiralty was in emergency meetings. Humanity had only been traveling through space for 30 years. They had made contact with dozens of alien species and had been accepted into the galactic community, though many of the older races still looked down on them as primitive newcomers. Humans had fought a few small wars on their frontier worlds, but never anything like a major interstellar conflict. The debate in the Coalition Council chamber was fierce. Some argued that intervening would be suicide. The Krell Dominion was powerful, with hundreds of ships and a reputation for brutality. Others said it was not humanity's fight and that getting involved would only make enemies. But Captain Lisa Hayes of the battleship Valiant argued differently. She stood before the council in her dark blue uniform, her voice steady and clear. "I understand the risks," she said, "but we need to ask ourselves what kind of species we want to be. These people are begging for help. They have children. They are dying. And we have the power to do something about it." "The Krell will crush us," one admiral said. "We are not ready for a war with a major power." "Maybe not," Lisa replied. "But are we really going to sit here and listen to that message play over and over knowing we did nothing? Is that who we are?" The chamber fell silent. Everyone had heard the Varani distress call by now. It played in the background constantly, a reminder of what was at stake. Admiral Kyle Bennett, one of the senior commanders in the fleet, stood up. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had fought in the border wars and knew the cost of combat. "Captain Hayes is right," he said. "If we want to be respected in this galaxy, we need to show that we stand for something. We need to show that humanity keeps its promises, even to strangers." The vote was close, but it passed. The Terran Defense Coalition would send the Third Fleet to Veran Prime. Within hours, ships began gathering at the staging point near Jupiter. The dreadnought Titan's Fist, Admiral Bennett's flagship, was the largest vessel humanity had ever built. Around it assembled 26 other warships, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and carriers loaded with fighter craft. Lisa Hayes stood on the bridge of the Valiant as her crew prepared for departure. Her executive officer, Commander Beth Morgan, reviewed the tactical data they had on the Krell. "They have about 80 ships in the Veran system," Beth said. "Most are military vessels. We will be heavily outnumbered." "I know," Lisa said quietly. She looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, people were dying. People who had done nothing wrong except exist in a galaxy where might made right. "Do you think we can win?" Beth asked. Lisa was quiet for a moment. "I think we have to try." The fleet jumped into hyperspace, leaving human territory behind. The journey would take 5 days. Every hour they continued to receive the Varani distress signal, growing weaker as more transmitters were destroyed. On Veran Prime, Elder Sona gathered the remaining survivors in the deepest trenches of the ocean. Thousands of Varani huddled together in the darkness, sharing their fear through their telepathic bonds. Above them, the Krell were systematically destroying everything. "Did anyone answer?" a young Varani asked Sona. The elder looked at the child with sad eyes. "I do not know, little one, but we must have hope." Even as she said it, she felt that hope fading. The galaxy had abandoned them, but unknown to the Varani, help was coming. Humanity's fleet raced through the void, pushing their engines to maximum speed. They were coming to answer a cry for help from people they had never met, because that was what humans did. The Krell blockade fleet hung in orbit above Veran Prime like a pack of predators circling wounded prey. Warlord Thax stood on the bridge of his command ship, watching the final destruction of the Varani civilization below. His mandibles clicked together in satisfaction. This had been almost too easy. In 3 more days, the last of the Varani would be dead or enslaved, and Veran Prime would become another conquered world in the Krell Dominion. Thax would receive honors and command of an entire sector. His reputation as a conqueror would be secure. Then the alarm started screaming. "Warlord," his sensor officer chittered urgently. "We have multiple contacts emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the system." Thax turned his large compound eyes toward the display. 27 ships appeared on the screen, arranged in a precise military formation. He studied them for a moment, accessing his database of known species and vessels. "Humans," he said with amusement. "The primates from Earth." His officers made sounds that resembled laughter. Everyone in the Krell military had heard of humanity. They were a young species, barely a few decades in space. They had a few colonies and a small fleet. They were nothing compared to the might of the Krell Dominion. "Should we destroy them, Warlord?" his weapons officer asked. "Send them a message first," Thax said. "Let us see if they have the sense to flee." The human fleet moved steadily toward Veran Prime. On the bridge of the Titan's Fist, Admiral Kyle Bennett watched the Krell formation with careful eyes. He had spent the entire journey studying everything humanity knew about Krell tactics and technology. "They have 83 ships," Commander Beth Morgan reported. 62 are military vessels. They outgun us 3-1. "Understood," Bennett said calmly. He had expected as much. A message came through from the Krell flagship. Warlord Thax's face appeared on the screen. His insectoid features twisted in what might have been a smile. "Turn back, primates," Thax said in perfect English. The Krell were thorough in their intelligence gathering. "This world is ours. Leave now and we will not destroy your ships." Bennett looked at the alien commander for a long moment. Then he gestured for Lisa Hayes to respond. The captain of the Valiant stepped forward. "You have 1 hour to withdraw your forces and leave the system," Lisa said clearly. "This is your only warning." The Krell bridge erupted in their clicking laughter. Thax's expression changed to something like anger. "You dare threaten us? You are children playing with toys. We will crush you and then finish destroying the Varani. Your bones will float in space as a warning to others." The transmission cut off. Bennett turned to his fleet commanders on the open channel. "All ships prepare for combat. Execute attack pattern Alpha on my mark." The human fleet began to move. They accelerated toward the Krell blockade, their formation tight and disciplined. The Krell fleet moved to intercept, confident in their numerical superiority. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for decades. The human ships opened fire first, at a range that surprised the Krell. Human weapons technology had focused on long-range precision, and their missiles and energy weapons reached out across space with deadly accuracy. 3 Krell cruisers exploded before they could even return fire. The Krell fleet charged forward, trying to close the distance. Thax was confident that once they got close, their superior numbers would overwhelm the humans. But the human fleet began executing maneuvers that no Krell commander had ever seen. Human warships could pull turns that should have crushed their crews with G-forces. The Krell knew that most species could only handle 3 or 4 times their planet's gravity before losing consciousness. But humans, bred on a heavy gravity world, could endure much more. Human pilots routinely trained at forces that would kill most other species. Lisa Hayes stood on the bridge of the Valiant as her ship rolled through a turn that put 7 Gs on the crew. Around her, officers gripped their stations but remained focused on their tasks. This was what they had trained for. "Target the carrier group," she ordered. "All weapons, fire at will." The Valiant's guns opened up, sending streams of explosive rounds into a cluster of Krell support ships. Human weapons were brutal and over-engineered, designed by a species that knew war all too well. Across the battlefield, the human fighter pilots were showing the Krell what real combat flying looked like. Lieutenant Sam Porter led his squadron of Hellcat fighters against a screen of Krell interceptors. The Krell pilots were skilled and experienced, but they had never faced anything like human reaction times. Sam's fighter spun and twisted through space, his hands moving almost faster than thought on the controls. A Krell fighter tried to get on his tail, but Sam pulled a split-second reversal that put him behind his target instead. His guns fired and the enemy exploded. "Hellcat squadron, break left and engage those bombers," Sam called out. His pilots responded instantly, moving as a coordinated unit. The Krell were discovering something terrifying about humans. They did not fight like other species. Most galactic races approached warfare carefully, trying to minimize losses and preserve their expensive ships. Humans fought with a controlled aggression that was almost frightening. They took damage that would force other species to retreat and kept fighting. The battleship Guardian took a direct hit that tore through 2 decks and killed 30 crew members. Any other species would have pulled back to make repairs. Instead, the Guardian's captain ordered his ship forward, returning fire with every weapon that still functioned. Warlord Thax watched in growing horror as his fleet began to fall apart. His ships were exploding one after another. The human vessels were smaller but faster, more maneuverable and far more durable than anything he had encountered. When Krell ships were hit, they died quickly. When human ships were hit, they seemed to simply absorb the damage and keep fighting. "All ships concentrate fire on their flagship," Thax ordered desperately. If he could kill their admiral, perhaps the humans would break. 20 Krell ships turned their weapons on the Titan's fist. The massive human dreadnought disappeared in a storm of fire and explosions. For a moment, Thax felt hope. Then the Titan's fist emerged from the blast, its armor scarred and burning but still intact. Its main guns rotated toward the Krell flagship and fired. Admiral Bennett gripped his command chair as the ship shook from multiple impacts. Damage reports flooded in, but his ship was still fighting. Human engineers had designed the Titan's fist with multiple redundant systems. You had to practically destroy it completely to stop it from operating. "Target their command ship," Bennett ordered. "Hit them with everything." The Titan's fist's main cannons fired, joined by missiles from a dozen other human ships. The Krell flagship's shields collapsed, and then its hull began to break apart. Warlord Thax felt his ship dying around him. In his last moments, he understood what his empire had not. Humanity was not weak. They were deathworlders, forged in the fires of a harsh planet, and they had brought that violence to the stars. The Krell flagship exploded in a brilliant flash. The remaining Krell fleet began to retreat. Without their commander and having lost over 40 ships, they had no desire to continue fighting. The humans had broken them completely. 3 hours after the battle began, the last Krell vessel jumped into hyperspace, fleeing the system. The human fleet held position above Varan Prime, damaged but victorious. Deep below the ocean's surface, the Varani felt the bombardment stop. They reached out with their telepathic senses and felt the Krell presence fading, being driven away. And they felt something else, a new presence in orbit. Strange minds, fierce and powerful, but somehow gentle beneath the violence. Elder Sona wept with relief. Someone had answered their call. Against all odds, help had come. On the bridge of the Valiant, Lisa Hayes looked down at the blue planet below. They had won the battle in space, but she knew the war was not over. The Krell had soldiers on the ground, occupying Varani cities. "Admiral," she said into the comm, "request permission to lead the ground assault." Bennett's voice came back, tired but firm. "Permission granted, Captain." "Bring our people home." Lisa nodded and began issuing orders. The real fight was about to begin. The dropships fell through Varan Prime's atmosphere like meteors, their heat shields glowing orange in the thin air. Inside one of the transports, Private Amy Cole gripped her rifle and tried not to think about the anti-aircraft fire that filled the sky around them. She was 22 years old and had been in the Marines for less than a year. This was her first real combat mission, and she was terrified. 2 minutes to landing. The pilot's voice crackled over the comm. "Hang on back there." Amy looked around at the other Marines in the transport. Some were veterans with hard faces and steady hands. Others, like her, were new soldiers trying to look brave. Their squad leader, Sergeant Ryan Clark, sat across from her cleaning his rifle with calm, practiced movements. "First time is always rough," Ryan said, noticing her fear. "Just stick with the squad and follow orders. We will get through this." The ship shook violently as something exploded nearby. Alarm screamed in the cockpit. "We are hit," the pilot shouted. Losing altitude. "Brace for emergency landing." The transport spun out of control. Amy felt her stomach drop as they plummeted toward the ocean below. The pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Greg Stone, fought with the controls, trying to slow their descent. At the last second, he managed to level out the ship. They hit the water hard. The impact threw Amy against her restraints. Water began pouring in through cracks in the hull. For a terrible moment, she thought they would sink and drown. "Move, move, move," Ryan shouted. "Get out of the ship now!" The Marines scrambled toward the emergency exits. Amy followed Ryan into the water, her sealed combat suit automatically adjusting to the aquatic environment. Around her, the other survivors from the transport gathered in the shallow sea. "Sound off," Ryan called out. 14 voices responded. They had lost 6 people in the crash, including Greg Stone, who had stayed at the controls to save the rest of them. Amy felt sick, but there was no time to process it. In the distance, she could see the Varani capital city rising from the ocean, its beautiful towers now scarred and burning. Krell forces held the city, and the Marines had a job to do. Colonel Dan Wright stood on the command ship watching the assault unfold. The landing was messy, with several transports damaged or destroyed by Krell ground fire, but most of his Marines had made it down safely. Now came the hard part. The Krell had approximately 50,000 soldiers occupying the capital and surrounding areas. Dan had 5,000 Marines. On paper, the odds looked terrible, but Dan had faith in his troops. "All units begin advance on the capital," he ordered. "Stay in your squads. Watch your spacing. Let's show these bugs what humans can do." The Marines moved through the shallow waters toward the city. The Krell had built defensive positions along the outer edges, expecting the Varani to counterattack eventually. What they got instead was 5,000 humans who had trained their entire lives for this kind of fight. Ryan's squad reached the city's edge as dawn broke over the ocean. The Krell had fortified the entrance with heavy weapons and barriers. Any frontal assault would be suicide. Amy Parker set up suppressing fire on that gun position, Ryan ordered. "Martinez, take your team around the left flank. We will give you 2 minutes, then we hit them from the front." Amy positioned herself behind a piece of rubble and aimed at the Krell position. Her heart was pounding, but her training took over. When Ryan gave the signal, she started firing. The Krell returned fire immediately. Energy bolts sizzled through the air around her. One hit the wall next to her head, showering her with fragments. She kept firing. Martinez's team hit the Krell from the side, throwing grenades and charging in with rifles blazing. The Krell position collapsed within minutes. Ryan's squad moved forward. This pattern repeated hundreds of times across the city as human Marines pushed deeper into Krell-held territory. The fighting was brutal and close range. The Krell were bigger and stronger than individual humans, but the Marines fought with a coordination and determination that the Krell could not match. Sergeant Ryan Clark led his squad through flooded streets, clearing buildings one at a time. The Krell fought back hard, but they were learning a terrible truth about humans. They did not stop. Where Krell soldiers would withdraw after an hour of intense combat to rest, humans kept going. And going, and going. "Sergeant, we have been fighting for 6 hours straight," one of his Marines said. "When do we rest?" "When the city is secure," Ryan replied. His body ached and his ammunition was running low, but he pushed the fatigue aside. He had fought for longer than this before. The Krell commander in the city, a veteran warrior named Krax, watched his forces being systematically destroyed. He had expected a quick battle. Instead, these humans had been fighting non-stop for an entire day. How was that possible? What kind of species could endure such prolonged combat without breaking? He sent urgent messages to the remaining Krell fleet in orbit begging for support. But the fleet was gone, driven away by the human warships. There would be no help coming. Captain Nicole Davis coordinated the artillery support from offshore. She stood on the deck of a human cruiser, watching the city through high-powered optics. When Marine units called in targets, she made sure the strikes were precise. "We have Krell armor at grid 773. A radio call came in. "Request fire support." Nicole checked the coordinates against the map of Varani civilian shelters. The Krell tanks were dangerously close to a building full of refugees. "Guns, I need precision fire on that target," she said to her weapons crew. "Margin of error is 5 meters. If we miss, we kill civilians." Her crew set up the shot carefully. Nicole held her breath as the shells arced through the air. They hit the Krell position perfectly, destroying the tanks while leaving the nearby building untouched. The Varani, hiding in shelters throughout the city, watched in amazement. These fierce warriors from Earth were risking their lives to protect people they had never met. The Varani had thought all warriors were like the Krell, brutal and uncaring. But the humans were different. They fought with savage intensity against their enemies, but showed gentle care for the innocent. On the 4th day of fighting, Ryan's squad pushed into the central district of the capital. Amy had stopped counting how many firefights they had been in. Everything was a blur of movement, gunfire, and brief moments of rest before the next battle. They found a group of Varani civilians trapped in a collapsed building. The Krell had been using the building as a supply depot and had booby-trapped it when they retreated. The Varani, emerging from hiding, had triggered the traps. "We need to get them out," Amy said, looking at the rubble. "The Krell could be regrouping for a counterattack," another Marine pointed out. "We need to keep moving." Ryan looked at the trapped Varani, then at his squad. He made a decision. "We are Marines," he said quietly. "We get them out." For the next 2 hours, the squad worked to free the civilians while maintaining a defensive perimeter. Amy helped pull a young Varani from the wreckage. The alien child looked at her with large, frightened eyes. Through the translator, a simple thank you came through. Amy felt tears on her face. This was why they were here. This was what made the exhaustion and fear worth it. By the end of the 4th day, Colonel Dan Wright stood in what had been the Krell Command Center. His Marines had taken the capital. The remaining Krell forces were retreating to their landing ships, trying desperately to escape. The cost had been heavy. Wright had lost over 400 Marines in the fighting, but they had freed the Varani capital and driven the Krell from the planet. He walked outside and looked up at the sky. Human warships hung in orbit like guardian angels. On the ground, his exhausted Marines were helping Varani civilians, setting up medical stations and distributing supplies. A Varani elder approached him, moving carefully through the water. Through the translator, she spoke. "You saved us. Why?" "We are nothing to you." Wright looked at the alien with tired eyes. "Because you needed help," he said simply. "Because it was the right thing to do." The Varani elder touched his hand gently, a gesture of deep respect in her culture. All around them, the city was coming back to life. The battle for Varen Prime was over. Humanity had won. The sun rose over Varen Prime for the first time in weeks without the sound of weapons fire. Captain Lisa Hayes walked through the ruins of the Varani capital, watching her Marines help with the recovery efforts. The contrast was striking. These same soldiers who had fought so fiercely were now carefully pulling survivors from rubble and passing out medical supplies to traumatize civilians. Young Marine named Kevin Price was trying to communicate with a group of Virani children. The translator device made the conversation awkward, but the kids were fascinated by the human soldier. One of them reached out and touched his armored hand, and Kevin smiled despite his exhaustion. "Captain Hayes," a voice called out. Lisa turned to see Commander Beth Morgan approaching. "The Virani Council has requested a meeting with you and Admiral Bennett." Lisa nodded and made her way to the temporary council chamber. The original had been destroyed in the fighting. Now the Virani leadership gathered in a repurposed shelter deep below the city. Admiral Kyle Bennett was already there when Lisa arrived. Elder Sona, the leader of the Virani Council, floated in the center of the chamber. Around her, the other council members watched the humans with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Please sit," Sona said through the translator. Humans could not float in water the way Virani did, so chairs had been provided. "Elder Sona," Bennett said respectfully, "we are glad we could help your people." Sona's large eyes studied the Admiral. "You are warriors born," she said softly. "We watched you fight. We felt your minds during the battle. You approach violence as naturally as we breathe water. It terrifies us." Lisa felt a pang of sadness at those words. She had hoped the Virani would see past humanity's military capabilities. "But," Sona continued, "we also watched what came after. We saw your soldiers pull our children from burning buildings. We saw them share their food with our hungry. We saw them cry when they could not save everyone." The elder moved closer. "You are warriors, yes, but you are also protectors. We did not know such a thing was possible." Bennett was quiet for a moment. "We come from a difficult world, Elder Sona. Earth is not a kind place. We had to become strong to survive. But that strength, we choose to use it to protect others. Not everyone makes that choice, but we do." The council members whispered among themselves in their telepathic way. Another elder, a male named Torin, spoke up. "The Krell will return," he said. "When they learn of their defeat, they will come back with everything they have. They cannot allow this humiliation to stand." Lisa and Bennett exchanged glances. They had been discussing this very issue. "You are probably right," Bennett admitted. "That is why I am leaving a garrison here. 500 Marines and 2 destroyers. It is not much, but it will give you some protection." "And if the Krell bring a larger fleet?" Sona asked. Bennett stood up and looked at each council member. "Then we will come back, all of us. I give you my word as an officer and a human being. If the Krell threaten you again, humanity will return to defend you." "Why?" Torin asked. "Why would you risk your people for us again?" "Because that is who we are," Lisa said simply. "Because leaving you defenseless would be wrong." The Virani Council was silent, processing this. Finally Sona spoke. "We wish to learn to defend ourselves. We cannot rely on your protection forever. Will you teach us?" Bennett smiled. "I was hoping you would ask. We have instructors ready to begin training volunteers immediately." Over the next week, human military personnel worked with Virani volunteers to establish a basic defense force. It was not easy. The Virani had no cultural background in warfare. They flinched at loud noises and found it difficult to even hold weapons. Gunnery Sergeant Chris Kane stood on a training field with a group of Virani students. They looked at the rifles in their hands as if the weapons might bite them. "I know this is hard," Chris said patiently. "I know everything in your culture tells you that violence is wrong. But defending yourself is not the same as being an aggressor. You have the right to protect your families and your world." A young Virani named Sula raised her hand. "But we are not warriors like you. We do not have your strength or your courage." Chris walked over to her. "You think courage is not being afraid? Wrong. Courage is being afraid and doing what is necessary anyway. You are all showing courage right now just by being here." Slowly, carefully, the Virani began to learn. They would never be warriors like humans, but they could learn to defend their homes. Chris worked with them day after day, patient and encouraging. He found himself growing fond of these gentle people who were trying so hard to change. Meanwhile, the human engineers worked with Virani technicians to repair damaged infrastructure and build defensive installations. The Virani were brilliant scientists and engineers, but they had focused all their knowledge on peaceful pursuits. Now they were learning to turn their technology toward defense. Captain Nicole Davis oversaw the installation of orbital defense platforms. The Virani had the technology but had never thought to weaponize it. Nicole showed them how to adapt their systems. This platform can scan for incoming ships, she explained to a group of Varani engineers. If hostile vessels approach, it will alert your defense forces and can engage them automatically if needed. The Varani engineers were amazed and horrified in equal measure. We never imagined using our technology this way, one said. I hope you never have to use it, Nicole replied honestly. But if the Krell come back, you will be ready. On the 10th day after the battle, the human fleet prepared to depart. Admiral Bennett stood on the bridge of the Titan's Fist looking down at Varen Prime one last time. They had done good work here. The planet was healing and its people were learning to stand on their own. Elder Sona sent one final message to the departing fleet. You have given us a gift we can never repay. You have given us hope. You have shown us that strength and kindness can exist together. We will remember you always. If ever you need help, you need only call. The Varani people will answer. Bennett felt emotion tighten his throat. Thank you, Elder Sona. Take care of your people. The human ships jumped into hyperspace, leaving behind a small garrison and a world forever changed. The Marines and crew who remained on Varen Prime would serve as both protectors and teachers, helping the Varani prepare for whatever came next. Private Amy Cole was one of those who stayed. She stood on the floating platform that served as the human base, watching the sunset over the ocean. A group of Varani children played nearby, their fear of humans completely gone. One of them waved at Amy and she waved back. Sergeant Ryan Clark walked up beside her. Having second thoughts about volunteering to stay? Amy shook her head. No, this is where I need to be. These people need us, Ryan nodded. Yeah, they do. At least for now. Maybe one day they won't need anyone to protect them. You think the Krell will come back? Amy asked. Ryan looked up at the stars. Probably. But when they do, they will find a very different Varen Prime. And if they are smart, they will turn around and leave. As the days passed, the Varani continued to rebuild. They would never be a warrior species like humanity. Their nature was too gentle, too focused on peace and knowledge. But they learned to stand firm. They learned that sometimes you had to be willing to fight for what you loved. The human garrison settled into their role. They trained Varani volunteers, maintained the orbital defenses, and became part of the community. Children who had once hidden from them now played with them. Adults who had feared them now invited them to cultural celebrations. Gunnery Sergeant Chris Kane found himself teaching not just weapons handling, but philosophy. The Varani wanted to understand how humans balance their capacity for violence with their compassion. We had to learn it the hard way, Chris explained to a class of students. Earth is full of predators, natural disasters, and harsh conditions. We survived by being tough, but we also survived by working together, by caring for each other. Our violence comes from our world. Our compassion comes from our hearts. Both are part of who we are. A Varani elder who was observing the class spoke up. And you choose which part to show? Chris nodded. Every single day. That is what makes us human, not the violence. The choice, the Varani finally understood. These strange, fierce beings from Earth were not monsters. They were people who had learned to carry both light and darkness within them, and who chose to let the light guide their actions. As the weeks turned into months, Varen Prime grew stronger. The wounds of war began to heal, though the scars would remain forever. The Varani had lost their innocence, but they had gained something else, the knowledge that they could endure, that they could protect themselves, that they were not helpless. And somewhere in the depths of space, humanity's fleet continued its journey home, carrying with them the knowledge that they had made a difference. They had answered a cry for help, and in doing so, had shown the galaxy what humanity truly stood for. The news of humanity's victory at Varen Prime spread across the galaxy like wildfire. On hundreds of worlds and thousands of languages, people talked about what had happened. The young species from Earth, barely 30 years in space, had challenged the Krell Dominion and won. More importantly, they had done it to save strangers who could offer them nothing in return. The Galactic Council, the ancient governing body that oversaw relations between spacefaring civilizations, called an emergency session. The massive station called Unity 1, a structure older than human civilization itself, filled with representatives from across known space. Admiral Kyle Bennett and Captain Lisa Hayes stood in a transport approaching the station. They had been summoned to explain their actions. Both knew this could go badly. We might be facing sanctions, Lisa said quietly. Maybe even expulsion from the galactic community. Bennett looked at her with calm eyes. Then we will deal with it. I would rather be expelled for doing the right thing than welcomed for doing nothing. The council chamber was enormous, designed to accommodate species of wildly different sizes and environmental needs. At the center floated Council Speaker Vorath, a being of pure energy from a race so old they had forgotten their own origins. Humans, Vorath's voice echoed through the chamber. You stand accused of violating protocols, of acting without council sanction, and of potentially starting an interstellar war. What do you say to these charges? Lisa Hayes stepped forward. Her uniform was clean and pressed, but she still bore the marks of recent combat, a healing scar on her cheek, tired eyes that had seen too much. With respect, Council Speaker, Lisa said, her voice clear and strong. We did what you should have done. The Varani sent a distress call that traveled across the galaxy. They were being slaughtered. They begged for help, and everyone ignored them. The chamber erupted in noise. Representatives from dozens of species began arguing. Some agreed with Lisa. Others were outraged at her audacity. You are newcomers, a representative from the Tall One species said, his voice dripping with condescension. You do not understand the complexities of galactic politics. We cannot simply intervene every time a minor species faces difficulties. Bennett spoke up then, his voice harder than Lisa's. You mean you cannot be bothered to help those weaker than you? You hide behind politics and protocols while people die. We call that cowardice where I come from. The chamber went silent at that. No one had ever spoken to the council this way. Then the Krell ambassador stood. He was a massive warrior, his armor gleaming, his mandibles clicking with rage. The humans have committed an act of war against the Krell Dominion, he said. We demand compensation. We demand punishment, and we promise retaliation. Vorath began to speak, but another voice interrupted. A small furred creature stepped forward. Ambassador Trell of the Mirani, a species that had been conquered and then abandoned by the Council decades ago. Council Speaker, if I may, Trell said. I have heard these charges and I must speak. The humans answered a call that we have all heard before. My people sent similar calls 23 years ago, when the Krell invaded our outer colonies. No one came. We lost 3 million people. Other representatives began to stand, species after species, all telling similar stories, calls for help that went unanswered, invasions that the Council ignored. The pattern was clear. The Council only protected the strong. The weak were left to die. Perhaps, Trell continued, we should be asking ourselves why it took Deathworlders to show us what honor looks like. The debate raged for hours. Some council members wanted to punish humanity. Others praised them. The Krell demanded action, but there was no consensus. Finally, Vorath spoke again. The council makes no formal condemnation at this time. But humanity is warned. Be more diplomatic in your future actions. This session is adjourned. It was not a victory, but it was not a defeat either. Bennett and Lisa left the chamber knowing they had dodged a crisis, but also knowing they had made enemies. As they walked through Unity One's corridors heading back to their transport, they were stopped repeatedly by representatives from smaller species. Each had the same question. If we need help, will you come? Lisa looked at these hopeful faces and felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Bennett saw her expression and understood. We have painted a target on humanity's back, he said quietly. I know, Lisa replied, but we have also given hope to those who had none. Is that not worth it? Bennett smiled. Yes, I think it is. Back on Earth, the Terran Defense Coalition was dealing with the fallout. The victory had made humanity heroes to some and threats to others. More importantly, it had revealed how dangerous the galaxy truly was. Fleet Admiral Patricia Stone stood before the coalition leadership. We need to expand the fleet, she said. The Krell will not forget this. They will come for us eventually. How soon? One council member asked. Patricia pulled up intelligence reports. Our estimates say 6 months to a year before they can assemble a fleet large enough to attack human space. We need to be ready. Construction yards across human space began working around the clock. New ships, new weapons, new defenses. Humanity had thrown down the gauntlet and now they had to be prepared for the response. But something else was happening too. Across the galaxy, Smaller species were beginning to look toward humanity, not with fear but with hope. The humans had shown that the strong could protect the weak. That might did not have to make right. Messages began arriving at Earth. Trade proposals, defense pacts, requests for training and assistance. Humanity was becoming something unexpected, a protector for those who had no protection. On Varen Prime, the human garrison continued their work. Gunnery Sergeant Chris Kane stood on a platform watching his Varani students practice with their weapons. They were still not warriors, but they had come far. They could defend themselves now. Elder Sona visited the human base frequently. She and Chris had become friends of a sort, despite coming from completely different worlds. "Do you think the Krell will return?" she asked him one evening. Chris looked up at the stars. "Yes, eventually. Your people humiliated them. They will want revenge. Are you afraid?" Sona asked. Chris thought about it. "A little, but mostly I am ready. And so are your people. They might not be able to defeat the Krell alone, but they can hold out until help arrives." "And will help arrive?" Sona asked quietly. "Yes," Chris said with absolute certainty. "If you call, we will come. That is what humans do." In the Krell home system, Warlord Crack stood before the Dominion Council. He had survived the battle at Varen Prime, but his reputation was destroyed. The Council blamed him for the defeat. "The humans must be crushed," Crack said. "They made us look weak. Every species under our rule will rebel if we do not act." The Council agreed. Orders went out to every Krell fleet. "Gather at the staging point. Prepare for war." The humans would learn what happened when you challenged the Krell Dominion. 6 months later, a massive Krell fleet began moving toward human space. Over 300 warships, the largest force the Dominion had assembled in decades. Their target, Earth itself. Humanity detected the fleet when it was still weeks away. Admiral Bennett stood in the war room on Earth looking at the display showing the approaching threat. "It is bigger than we thought," Commander Beth Morgan said. "Can we stop them?" another admiral asked. Bennett studied the numbers. Humanity had been building new ships constantly, but they still were outnumbered. "It would be a close fight. We can stop them," Bennett said firmly. "We have to." But then something unexpected happened. Messages began arriving at Earth from across the galaxy. The Varani were sending ships, small vessels crewed by their new defense forces. The Mirani were sending their fleet. A dozen other species, all those who humanity had given hope to, were coming to help. "We stand with you," Ambassador Trell's message said. "You stood for us when no one else would. Now we stand for you." Lisa Hayes watched the reports coming in and felt tears on her face. Humanity had answered a cry for help, and now the galaxy was answering theirs. The stage was set for the greatest battle humanity had ever fought. The Krell were coming with everything they had, but they would not find Earth defenseless. They would not find humanity alone. Admiral Bennett looked at the assembled fleet, both human and alien, and gave the order. "All ships, prepare for combat. Let us show the Krell what happens when you threaten those under our protection." The message that humanity had sent at Varen Prime was now echoing across the galaxy. The strong should protect the weak. Might does not make right, and if you cry for help, someone should answer. That was what it meant to be human. That was what it meant to be part of a community. Not just taking, but giving. Not just surviving, but standing for something greater. As the Krell fleet approached and the Allied forces prepared to meet them, one thing was certain. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had changed the rules. They had shown that a different way was possible, and whatever happened next, whatever the cost, they would not stand down. They would not abandon those who depended on them. They would fight for what was right, even against impossible odds, because that was what humans did.